So we are now recording. Hi, welcome to our EFC meeting.
Good morning.
Good morning. Long time no see for some of y'all.
Yeah.
So let me pull up today's agenda. And we will get started. I sent out the notes from August 27th, our last meeting. Hopefully you had a chance to look at those because we decided we're not going to take time during the meetings to look at those. So the version that I sent should have already had one edit on there for something that I had said. Instead of policy and procedure, I changed that with EFC because that's what I want to be notified is when something deals with EFC, not when it deals with policy and procedure. Unless, of course, the policy and procedure deals with the EFC. So do we have a motion to approve the notes? Okay, Michael E. moves. Do we have a second? I can't see everybody and Dahlia is not with us today. So she's gonna watch the recording and take notes from that. So did we have a second?
Second.
Okay, Vicente second. All those in favor of approving the notes? Say aye because I can't see all of you.
Aye.
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 Okay. The notes are approved. We've got a couple of ad hoc committee updates today. Kelly, are you here? Ruby, I know you're here.
We're here.
Okay,
Yes.
so floor is yours.
We continue to be in progress. No, we do have the report. We made a lot of edits to it last week. The group seems to be pretty well cohesive on the finer points of everything. And it's just kind of cleaning things up. Dr. Davis, Chris is adding some graphics for people that are more visual because you don't want me to do that. It'll come out like little stick figures pointing in weird directions. We'll get Chris on that. And so I think we'll be ready to present to the EFC.
Okay.
At the end of September meeting. I think so.
The next meeting in 2 weeks.
Yes, I think we'll be ready at that
Okay.
point. So cleaning up language and making it look good.
Any questions for Kelly or Ruby on that?
I can't recall the last time we got an EFC presentation. I probably should be able to, but just to make sure, we will get the recommendations ahead of time. We won't be reading them at the same time that we get the presentation.
No, I'll make sure that they go out
Okay, thank you.
ahead. I'll get them to Cindy to make sure that they get to everyone. And if I can't get them close, if it's too close, like if it's like Thursday night, I'll just push us to the next one. So, because yeah, it's no point in doing it if you haven't read what's in there.
That's a milestone. Good job.
Okay. Moving on to the student mentoring model. Judah is not here, but she texted me and they have met with the ad hoc group. They've gone over the recommendations and they're still on track to be ready to present to the EFC in October. And this is not unusual for the first couple of meetings in the school year to be a bunch of refreshing from last year and just at this point in the semester getting our feet back under us. So moving on to the recommendation update, because this has been presented, is the tenure proposal. Aaron, care to lead us through that?
Sure. We had an initial conversation in the middle conversation last week with members of the ad hoc committee and esteemed members of the administration, including outgoing President Dr. Garza, incoming President of Representative, I should say, Rick Baser. Good morning. As well as Dr. Raley, Linda Boyer-Owens, and a couple of representatives from the legal team, Ross and Roxella. And I'm going to forget somebody if of course, Cindy was there, Judah was there. Did I miss anybody? I missed somebody, didn't I? I always leave somebody out. But it was a good discussion getting it started. But part of it was just laying out some of the issues at hand. We're trying to get to the recommendations in the report and talk about the viability of those recommendations and what role some of the issues play, including the multi-year contracts that were not part of the original report. They were, it was expressed that those needed to be part of our story by the chancellor. We added language and say, is this what you mean? And so we're right at that point talking through that. It has not been presented to SLT, but we this morning in our meeting with the chancellor and Linda and Dr. Rayleigh and Dr. Garza was there, identified another opportunity to talk through that with the chancellor present and talk through the recommendations themselves. And so we're kind of talking about, well, let's do that. And my idea was like, let's have like a small group of people and meet in person. And they're like, well, that sounds great. Well, actually, we have to have all the presidents there, and well, the whole ad hoc committee, or at least the representatives from one representative from each college should be there. And now we're, more than 10 people. And I had more of like a six, 7 people in mind. But I think we can work through that. And I think we can also be nimble and agile, and not everybody. And so we're trying to work through that, but it looks like it's going in the direction of having that larger group. I would like to meet in person. There's been this move to not have as many in-person meetings, but like, I want to like look, sometimes when we're on the screen, we're just looking at our own picture talking, I'm looking at other people now. I'm looking at other people. So, so I would love to do this in person, but I don't know if having a larger group makes that more difficult is one of my concerns.
Yeah.
And that's, I guess, where we are. But we also got a sort of a look forward to where this might go, including that the faculty input model, which is part of the Policy and Procedure Advisory Committee model, that will go to the board in October. And then, oh yeah, Michael Lee wasn't there. Michael Lee, you're gonna love this. And then, so knowing that we can't overload the board with some of these stakeholder issues, we would have the tenure, target December as the month to take the new era tenure proposal before the board. So this is great news. I mean, I think we're encouraged by the, having these steps in view. This next meeting that we're going to have, I think is an important one, and we need to figure out what that one looks like, and I don't think it's clear yet. And I would love to hear what you guys have to say. Again, I am in favor of a in-person meeting with a smaller number of people.
Aaron, I saw Debbie typing, did they decide or propose October 1st for that conversation?
I'm sorry, for the
For that meeting that you're talking about.
Oh.
Did she say October 1st? Because he
Oh, I
said
thought it
2
was.
weeks.
Yeah, it's something like that. It's within the next couple of weeks. I'm not
Got
sure
the 24th.
The 24th, yeah.
There you go. Yeah.
The 24th?
It's still in
Okay.
September, yeah.
So right before this meeting in 2 weeks.
Okay.
So I don't know if anyone has thoughts on how to move forward with that meeting. There's some disagreement right there, so maybe this is not the place to talk about it. I don't know.
We can talk about it. If the 5 presidents have to be there, then I think that we need at least 5 faculty there.
That's a good idea.
I just wanted to say, I think it's really important that the whole ad hoc is there. Not just representatives from our college, but other college have sought me out knowing that I'm on EFC to ask me if I know more about what's going on with that, with the ad hoc. And
Yeah.
I'm like, but you're on the ad hoc, I'm not. So I think it's really important for the whole ad hoc to be in those meetings.
Okay. Any other suggestions?
Well, maybe I can ask some of the folks at DSO. with our policy about meetings, I would just love to have this be in person. And so if it's larger, does that make that more difficult? Where's our policy with regard to meeting size?
I don't think we have a policy on size. It is, I mean, just logistically and feeling connected and getting that face-to-face feel is more difficult when you do, large numbers face-to-face. We're going to do the board meeting face-to-face this month. So we have the boardroom. I mean, we have room to spread people out. I was thinking, Aaron, that I think what we said was after this meeting that we were talking about where they were trying to put the 5 presidents in, then after that, we also don't we still have to do SLT?
Yeah.
I wonder if that would be where you put in the whole ad hoc team. And maybe for the one with the presidents, maybe it's one representative from each college. I mean, you've got yourself and Judah and Cindy represent 3 colleges, and then maybe you add 2 more faculty from the other 2 colleges that are from the ad hoc. I don't know.
Yeah, Judah would like to have the same folks who were in the meeting last week, the same faculty representation.
Yeah.
So, and I think
Yeah.
that would be good.
I mean, I think we can accommodate, and I think we can do it safely.
Okay.
I mean, if you think about, we've got the whole boardroom. I mean, and there are big rooms on other campuses too, but it's just probably a little easier to get parking over there.
I think if we can nail down the number, then we can start looking for the space.
Yeah.
Because I think that
But like in
Broadway,
that room, you can prop the doors open. I mean, we can find a good, safe space to do it. Yeah. And if we're all willing
Broadway
to,
100 may work.
yeah, if we're all willing to mask and, I mean, we can pull it off. I'm sure we can.
Okay. Well, I think the number is pretty easy to calculate. It's the
Yeah.
5 faculty, 5 presidents. It's the 3 of us, Judah, myself, and Cindy. Is the Chancellor Linda and Dr. Rayleigh. And so that makes 16.
And Rick.
I don't know if I'm missing anybody, excuse me.
Rick, I think.
Oh, Rick, excuse me, sorry, 7.
Yeah, so that's not, 16 and
And I'm already-
17.
yeah, I'm
So
already-
maybe-
He's in with the presidents.
so
Oh,
maybe-
yeah, right, I knew,
I'm
yeah.
already counted.
Oh, right, you're right. Okay, yeah. We have also, just so you know, we have the last few, I think we were on budget meetings, right, Rick, where we were in room 100, that room right behind the front
Yes.
desk at DSO. And we did open an option for people who wanted to Zoom in because they just didn't feel comfortable or they couldn't get there for a very important budget meeting. So, I mean, I don't know, you could talk to your folks and see if I'm not aware of anybody on the administration side that would be uncomfortable with doing a face-to-face in a good setting, but you could check with your people and make sure if we need to open that we could.
I relish any opportunity.
Do you?
Yeah.
I miss people.
I understand that it might be,
Yesterday, I spent time in the line getting tested, and Don Lucas entertained us all in line. So
I missed out on that.
Tell him thank you. That's good.
I understand that I might be in the minority of really thinking that the full ad hoc on this type of meeting is important, but I'm just also thinking through our process. And I know most of the time when a recommendation is presented to SLT, it's typically the fellow and one representative from the ad hoc, usually a chair. And so I'm wondering, is there a rationale for why we're flipping that and saying we should only have a few at this middle conversation and then all of them at the SLT?
Michael, I was just saying you could have them all at the SLT if you wanted to. I think this is an extra sort of step, right, Aaron?
Yeah.
That's correct.
It's the
And-
nature of the question. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So in the meeting last week, we had, and this is in the notes from our last EFC meeting, we had the one, faculty member representative, and we tried to balance it out between tenured and contract. And
Oh,
so
yeah.
this would be a
That's-
continuation of that approach.
Mhm.
And we did have the meeting with the entire ad hoc to say, hey, this is what we're dealing with, and who can be there and who wants to be part of this conversation. And actually, it kind of worked out that the people who were available and willing to go were the 5 people, and there wasn't a feeling of being excluded per se that I noticed. Correct me if I'm wrong, Cindy. So I think your point is right, ML, that we need to be inclusive, and also, I mean, I think that we've got a good group. We could certainly invite everybody, and then maybe not everybody shows up.
Or set it up for Zoom and have those that weren't at the ad hoc Zoom in and observe what's going on so they can be, but I don't know how technically feasible that is. I guess if we can do it in classrooms.
Yeah, so I mean, the thing that happens is, and it happened in the last meeting, is that there will be a subject, and everybody says something on that subject. Sometimes it goes into a tangent, there's a left turn, and it just seems like we don't get to the thing. My goal is to get to the thing, which is to the recommendations, and talk through them and say, look, this is what we're talking about. And try to get to a targeted conversation. The more people that, and I love everyone's perspective, don't get me wrong. I feel like we're kind of at the point though where we're looking at a particular thing and saying, does this work? And when everybody weighs in and there are disagreements and stuff, it takes so much time to get to anything that it slows down our process. I know that we value faculty input at every turn, and we want everyone to be heard. And at some point, it's like, I just want to have this conversation and be really targeted. So, keeping us honest, ML. And I think that this meeting is probably needs to be more of that. Everyone is heard. I think at some point I just have a hard time seeing that we're going to actually decide anything when there are 16 people in the room. Am I wrong? I mean, not that we're
Well,
deciding anything here, but at some point there needs to be a team that's representing and saying, okay, look, what's happening here? This is the thing. What do you think? What do I think?
Well, from my understanding, those conversations, those middle conversations aren't decision-making conversations, right? It is the
Right.
EFC ad
Right.
hoc that would go away separately, consider the conversation, make some informed decisions about what the next draft of the recommendation would look like. And where my concern comes from is just the idea that there was an ad hoc who left for summer, not having multi-year contracts as part of a discussion, or as it sounds, they were on the no side of that and are coming back to hearing it is part of the discussion, but then also some of them are now still not part of the discussion. And again, I'm not saying that this is a fault or it's going to cause any certain chaos, but I just wonder if having those folks there, and maybe if you are too worried about it getting sidelined, is telling folks what the goal is, right? It's not to go off on each individual, it's to just go through those recommendations. I mean, I know it's up to the chairs, but I'm just putting my 2 cents in here that I think it would be really valuable for the whole ad hoc to be part of those conversations.
Sure. I think you're right.
Any other comments? Okay, we ready to move on to the next agenda item? Okay. So let me get rid of the agenda. Just a second. Where did it go? Okay, let me pull this up. Evidently I didn't open. No, it's there. Why is it? I'm having technical difficulties. Just bear with me. Okay, so we've got a presentation coming up for the board in October. This will change as more information comes in. The ad hocs that are completed and working on their presentations. We've got the end of course student surveys phase 2, clinical CTE courses. This has gotten on the schedule now for the VPASs on September 30th. Once we've gone through that, we'll get on the schedule for the SLT. And then once that gets approved through SLT, we can go to the board, and the nuts and bolts of what we'll have to do is get the list of the courses, do some programming and testing and implementation. And I'm hoping that this can be done for spring. It's going to depend on how long the programming and testing takes, those intermediate steps. It's going to determine that. We also have an ad hoc that's completed their work, working on their presentations, and that's for the New Era tenure proposal. Has been presented to EFC, feedback has been incorporated, presented to VPASs, feedback has been incorporated, and now we're in the part of the process where we're having middle conversations. We've had one, we're waiting for a response from, I'm not sure whether it was the admin of the conversation or the SLT. But we are waiting for a response, and then we're going to be going forward with another conversation. And then we've got 2 current EFC charges that are getting ready to prepare to present. The faculty evaluation and platform phase 1, which is the evaluation part. They're finalizing the write-up, and they should be ready to present to the EFC in September 2021. For the faculty student mentoring model, working on a draft of recommendation, should be ready to present to EFC in October of 2021. I'm going to go ahead. I'll figure out the bullets later. They have met this semester. I didn't have that information until Judah texted me. And although that's all I have to present, we are doing a lot of work. A lot of the stuff is going on behind the scenes, and we're like the ducks where we look smooth and cool on top, and we're just paddling underneath. So are there any questions, any comments?
Great job.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
It really feels like this whole EFC process is coming together. This is
It's
a
getting
good,
there.
it's
Yeah.
a good transition every year. The start of the new year is, but it's really, yeah, getting into a rhythm and continuity. Good job. Yeah, good job, Cindy.
Yeah.
We have you to thank for a lot of that.
Thank
Good
you.
job, Cindy. Mhm.
I'm actually kind of enjoying it, so yay.
Were we going, I thought we were going to have a presentation on the faculty input model from Michael Lee. Was that next time? Or what's
That's
that?
next on the agenda.
Oh, excuse me. Okay, I'm sorry. I thought you were wrapping it up.
No, I'm wrapping up my present. That's how I would wrap
That's
up the
right. Okay,
presentation.
just okay. For some reason, I thought we was like this the meeting.
I love Erin's enthusiasm. I'm up next, Erin.
Great. Thank you.
That's good.
Sorry.
Okay, so let me
It
pull
felt like
this.
it was the end of the day. I was like, what? Are we what? We're done? What?
Well, at least I know I've got a strong conclusion then.
Yes, very strong.
It worked.
Okay, great.
Okay, can y'all see the agenda now? Okay, next on the agenda is faculty input into policy and procedure. Michael Lee, do you need control?
Sure, if that's easiest, I'll take it.
Okay, you should be able to.
All right. Oops, let me get this to the beginning. Are y'all seeing a PowerPoint slide?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so I used a condensed version of the PowerPoint we gave to the board in October of last year, so almost a year ago. And there are a few nuances to notice between this presentation and the draft of the procedure that I sent around, but that's for discussion later. But I also wanted to remind us that last week we thought this would be beneficial just as a refresher of what this model is, because it's been quite some time. And also I wanted to emphasize that the purpose of this is informative. So I don't think it's the place in EFC to hash out its value or the process itself. If that conversation needs to happen, which it certainly can, I think that would be for the current UFS. Now, I know that a lot of the members are the same as here and there, but again, this is just informative. So I'll speed through some of these because you've probably all heard it, but the background here, it comes from a few instances that the UFS at the time saw an opportunity for us to really consider if we could have a universal, coherent, detailed, thorough way to get faculty feedback when a policy or procedure is being reviewed that directly affects us. Some particular instances were our first draft of the communications policy and procedure went to the board. There was a lot of concerns raised. And at that time, when the concerns were raised, Christy Wyatt and others did a really thorough job of going to every college, talking to every faculty senate, gathering the feedback, compiling it all together. And we thought, wow, wouldn't it be great if we could just do that all the time instead of, waiting until there's sort of a reactionary situation. We also saw the opportunity for the promotion procedure when that was being edited for there to be a universal way, because it was just different at each college and that caused confusion and sometimes fear around how that procedure was going to change. So those were the opportunities. I'll speed through the other timeline, which is it just gives us these slides give us the steps of what we did and when. I will highlight that it was in September of 19 that we convened a group, a work session of sorts with an outside facilitator. We had staff representatives, the EFC faculty fellow, of course, all the UFS, Dr. Rayleigh and Linda, and this is where we really started our work. This is a few other times that I won't go into detail, but we presented the SLT. We presented at UFS. We went back and forth, we edited, we revised. We even used our model as the way to gather feedback as like a trial run. So we're like, if we want to get our own faculty's feedback, which we thought was really important for a model like this, let's just use a draft of the model to try to do it. And it worked out. And we learned a little bit from it. And we made some edits to make it stronger. I would add to this timeline too, that in October of 2020, we presented to the board. After that, shortly after that, the past and current UFS met with the chancellor as well as Linda and Ross, and we went through the procedure itself in a lot of detail. So just now to the process. This is the most basic outline of the process. One thing that I think we could have maybe improved about the visual is that this is up to the number of days. Doesn't have to be on that day. So a lot of people see 49 days and freak out, but just know that every step of the way is up to that day. So for example, step 1 and step 2 are almost the same thing. So they might not take 7 full days to get it from UFS to the college senate presidents. They're the same people. But this is the process. I think this next one is probably for our purposes, maybe the most useful, which is somewhere, somehow, someone is embarking on drafting a new policy or procedure that would directly affect faculty, or they're editing one that already exists that it directly affects faculty. That triggers our process to happen. And what happens when this input model would be triggered is that it goes to UFS. The UFS send it out to their senates, including however, their Senate has determined to send it out to their full faculty body, including part-time and full-time adjuncts. And then that feedback is compiled at the college Senate level, and the college Senate sends something back to the UFS, and UFS further compiles it to deliver it back to the party that benefits from it the most. I will say that this has been just a little bit changed because or I wouldn't say change, but this is still in progress, because when we met with Ross after our presentation to the board, he really emphasized that this last step, we maybe wouldn't need to circle back to SLT because of the new PPAC that was going to exist, but he also just emphasized the importance of the chancellor. So basically, many of the recommendations of this input model, he recommended, let's just go directly to the chancellor. But in our model, we suggested that, it go back to the responsible party who's ever drafting this or revising it. It could also maybe go to SLT if that was important, if that was maybe the origin of some of these, or any other responsible parties. In our case, if it was from UFS, it would definitely need to go back. Excuse me, if it was from EFC, it would definitely need to go back to EFC. So I just wanted to stress too, if I go back here, I know last time we were discussing like, well, how much effort and work is it gonna cost the EFC to use our model? Just remember that even though there are a lot of the same people, in fact, all the UFS is on the EFC, that at the point that you're receiving feedback, it's handed off to the UFS, and the UFS would handle this process and then be handed back to the EFC. So this is a model that we're hoping would be used by all parties at our district and colleges. We have some provisions in our recommendations about what happens if we get to the final result, and like, for example, the draft was just, it did not sit well with faculty, and there were so many recommendations that we were actually suggesting that another draft go through the process. How many times could that happen? Or what happens if we reach 3 and then, it's gone through 3 times and there's just still disagreement? So we've hashed out some provisions of that in our procedure. And we also, of course, have an emergency fast track for things that are like accreditation or compliance, things like a pandemic that comes up and you need to do them really quickly, or things that are minor edits. So for example, we love to change council names, not as much recently as we have in the past, but we love to change council or committee names. If it's something like that, it can go through a minor edits track if we're just changing a name and not the content. Oh, and these were our final recommendations to the board. The first one actually had to do with policy. It didn't ever get voted on. It was only presented in a formal session. So I'll have to follow up with some of you all today on if this is also going to be part of the October. But we recommended that just some language be added to the policy that talks about how, the policy on policies, the policy that talks about how board policies and procedures are handled. It only gives, what am I trying to say? Responsibility to the chancellor or delegated parties by the chancellor to create or revise policy and procedure. And we were suggesting that there be something new for faculty there, particularly around review, that faculty could be recognized, particularly EFC and UFS, as reviewers of policy. We know that the job of procedure and policy, especially policy, lies in the hands of the board, but we just wanted to suggest the addition of reviewers. And then, of course, we were suggesting that our input model itself be added to that policy as a procedure. And that's it.
Thank you, Michael Lee.
Michael
A
Lee,
lot
I
of
have a
work has gone into
question.
that.
Michael Lee, on the 3 cycles, no more than 3 cycles, did y'all put like any provisions on time, like length? Like could the cycle last 3 months, a semester, an academic year?
Well, we have the maximum cycle for all of the like non-emergency. And so theoretically, no cycle could go over that if we're following our model carefully. We also wanted to have that format for the cycle because Dr. Rayleigh had shared with us at a previous institution that he was at that like when you get into the habit of this, there's no more wondering of what's happening with that procedure. You just count the days and you know which group has it and when it's going to pass along to the next. Now, a lot of folks were really concerned about the number of days, so we tried to shorten it and we shortened it and we shortened it and we kept emphasizing that it's up to that amount of days, so it may not work as perfectly as it sounds. It's just with this group for 7 days and then that one. But yes, to answer your question, even if it goes through 3 cycles, none of the 3 could be longer than our maximum amount if we follow the process.
Thank you.
And those reviewers, those have already been discussed and thought about, right? That extra on the last slide that you were talking about?
Yeah, and that actually wasn't, that was part of our October presentation, But then it was discussed in a board meeting after that where UFS members weren't talking. It was actually just a little line edit of that policy, and it was an informative presentation, and it did not end up in the next voting board meeting. So it has not been voted on, but it has been discussed by board members, I suppose.
Okay.
Thank you for that, Michael Lee. Great presentation of a strong model that we've talked about and looked at, and hopefully will be formally approved in October. That's what we're hoping is going to happen, what the chancellor was indicating, along with the PPAC model at large. UFS is gonna get together with Joe, the new ethics officer. Go ahead, Linda.
Yeah, I was just thinking when we do that, or maybe we need just a separate time with, if Michael Lee could go through this with Joe to kind of, as an orientation sooner rather than later, that would really help move the PPAC along. You know, if, I can't remember who was in those meetings. It was Ross and I and
Yeah.
Michael Lee. And I mean, if we just got that little group to run him through exactly this presentation, it was really good, Michael Lee. I think it would help him like have a jumping off point. He wouldn't be trying to recreate it, or, you know, he'd see where he needs to pick up, because he's going to play a major part, right, in helping the process run for all of us.
Yeah, I'm absolutely interested and available. So you just let me know when, and I'll be there.
So assuming that that's going to move forward, we'll loop you in on that, of course, Michael. You said exactly what I was going to say, Linda. We're on the same wavelength there. So the question for this group, I think, and I think the reason that we asked you to do that presentation is to ask, you know, how does this fit in with EFC? When does EFC ask for this process to happen? And you mentioned it's the UFS's responsibility. EFC can ask, is that built into the EFC process? Is it at the beginning? Is it at the end? Is it not built in and it just as needed basis? And so I think that's where we need to go with the conversation. Is that right?
I think so.
Say so, and I think the as needed is, I think already, if we land where I hope we're landing, which is to use our own model, but it would be particularly district policy and procedure changes. You know, like it's not, EFC has dealt with a lot of things that maybe are procedure adjacent or practices. This isn't the model for those things. This is for when we are suggesting edits to policy or procedure.
So let's say, you know, this tenure deal would have a change in procedure, presumably. Does this go to all faculty at the recommendation phase before it has gone out of EFC to VPASs and SLT, et cetera, before the board? Or after? So one of the things is we're proposing a change. Well, like as an example for tenure, we don't have the change in the policy. Like we don't have a policy to say, hey, what do you think about this thing that's finished? We could ask what they think in general about the issue, but that's where I'm a little unclear.
Yeah, I think in my understanding of how this input model would work, the later, the better. And the reason for that is because there's going to be a ton of overlap. The PPAC in its future development is going to be a lot of the SLT members and others. And so if it is already at the stage where the recommendations are pretty solid, the SLT has already seen them, maybe if there's not complete agreement and utopia, there's still probably a good sense of what's going to be presented to the board or, you know, implemented otherwise, that would be at the stage that it would go to PPAC to us, to that input model. Because if you recall from the procedure, in our revisions with Linda and Russ and the Chancellor, the PPAC is actually the mega group and our input model is within the PPAC. So because of how that would work, it's my recommendation that it would be the latest of EFC work possible that would be.
Then what what's the result? I mean, it's already it's already a done deal situation where like, oh, we'll check the box of faculty input and then like, okay, thank you for your faculty input. We've already done it. So how is that not that situation? And why
Well, I
wouldn't it be?
disagree that it wouldn't have an impact, because I think, maybe there's some part of, let's use the 10-year example. There's a 10-year procedure revision that comes from the recommendations that this group makes. And there's some line on it that's really vague or could be misconstrued. And that comes out over and over and over again when you send it out to faculty in the faculty feedback model. EFC would certainly want to hear that, right? And reconsider maybe just that one line or what have you. And remember that EFC would not have to deal with the raw data, the huge stuff. They're getting the streamlined trended feedback, the compiled information. So
And
I
see,
still think
I
there's a lot of
think that
value.
if it's going to be an EFC procedure, that it doesn't need to go back out to UFS and then come back into EFC. I would like it to stay under the umbrella of EFC, and the presidents could send it out as their role as presidents in the EFC. Personally, I would want to see the data. You know that.
Okay. I mean, I'm not opposed to that, but I was just saying in the model that we created. In the same way that if Dr. Rayleigh's office edited a procedure, it would go to the UFS to be sent out for feedback. And surely if Dr. Rayleigh's office wanted to see the raw data, absolutely he could. But UFS would be in charge of trying to give more compiled, streamlined information of what the faculty feedback looked like for convenience. And because we know not everyone is going to agree.
I think that sounds reasonable. I was playing the role of the skeptic there. I also know that, at every step, things can change. So by inserting it at the latest possible moment, there's less likelihood that things would change further, other than maybe based on what the faculty feedback is. Is that reasonable to assume, or does that make sense? I don't know.
Yeah, and honestly, I'm just thinking through, and Linda, maybe you can jump in here and help me. I honestly think that it's not going to be an option for us to choose if we send our recommendation through a PPAC. If it is policy or procedure related, like I don't think that's even up to us to decide if the PPAC is going to operate in the way that I understood it on paper and in presentations. Anything that's going to suggest policy or procedure changes at the district level is going to go through the PPAC. And this model is actually embedded in the PPAC. So we almost maybe don't even have a discussion that we have to agree on today here.
Oh,
It might be easier to imagine it, yes, when we get that PPAC process laid down a little more, which is why we really need to get Joe
okay.
oriented. But remember that the PPAC, as it's been conceived, you would have representatives on the PPAC also. So you'd be hearing this, things in development as they're coming up. And I think the other thing that we said was we wanted Joe, and he was on board, to start standing up a process also, so that we know what policies are coming up for review, so that you could always be aware of, things that are going to be coming down the pike for review and updating, and start thinking about that as faculty or UFS or EFC, sort of on a proactive basis also. And we're such perfectionists, but it probably won't be perfect. And we'll probably have to, figure out what's going to work a little bit after it gets up and running. It's a big complex process with lots of people, and usually that ends up requiring some fine tuning after we get some experience with it. I mean, I think everybody's intention is great, and we'll get it where it needs to be. You do remind me that some of the conversations I had with Tony last year were about, yes, what is your process? What is the faculty's process to conduct your part of the whole policy review process, and that's going to take some effort and thought. And how will you manage that if we start pushing a lot of policies and procedures through? It's going to take some support. Yeah. Just more things to think about.
So it sounds like we're not going to have this as part of EFC's process because that's already taken care of by the PPAC, and there's no reason for it to be in the EFC process. Is that what I'm hearing?
I would understand that, yeah, that's mostly the case. I think it depends on what type of recommendations the ad hoc committee ends up making, because I feel like if a ad hoc committee is making such direct recommendations that it is literally line edits of a procedure, well, then maybe they need to, be thinking ahead that this is going to go to the PPAC. This is going to be this other, process that it'll go through, and it might need to come back to EFC if there's a lot of suggestions for revisions about that. But I have not been on an ad hoc where we have made that type of line edit recommendation. That usually it happens later, I would say, Cindy, right at the implementation stage. So that's a whole nother can of worms that I'm not willing to open about EFC implementation and whose job that is. But I do think, to your point, Erin, yes, majority of the time, if this is going to go through the PPAC process, it's going to be at the very late stage of EFC. And it's not going to be another step in the EFC's process itself.
So I'm confused. So you're saying that it may or may not come back to EFC, depending on how many edits are needed.
If it goes through the PPAC process and from the PPAC goes to the faculty input model process, it absolutely should come back to EFC. Sorry if I was.
No, it goes to UFS.
But then to EFC, right? If EFC is the drafters.
Okay.
Actually,
yeah.
To make it even more complicated, if you read the procedure, it goes from PPAC to the input model to PPAC to UFS to EFC. But
Oh my
I don't
gosh.
mean to make that a cumbersome
UFS
thing.
back to EFC.
UFS is EFC, right? Like
No,
Well, in other words, I don't mean that a whole UFS has to call EFC, right? UFS has the feedback, and then they meet at EFC because they're the same people. I just don't see that as a conundrum.
I think for our
but that leaves
conversation,
the fellow out of the decision-making process and the input process, and it adds to the confusion between UFS and EFC.
But
I
when
need
the
to think.
feedback
I'm a deliberative thinker. I'm still thinking about this, so I haven't formed any conclusions yet. I'm just kind of talking out my thoughts.
But I'm sorry, I think I'm being confusing. When the feedback gets back to EFC, EFC is the only group that would make decisions about what to do with that feedback. And if they wanted
Would
to
it get to EFC to begin with, or would it stay with UFS to go through the PPAC procedure?
Our procedure outlined that it should go back to the drafting party or responsible party. So if EFC is making the recommendations, EFC is the responsible and drafting party. So the feedback shall go back to the responsible and drafting party. Now,
So UFS would still be presenting proposals to the EFC?
They would be presenting feedback, the feedback.
No,
that
I'm
they
saying to
got.
begin with, to get the whole process started, when an idea comes up and it gets before the UFS, and y'all have to decide whether to take it on yourself or to give it off to EFC. If it's a policy or procedure change, then would UFS keep it and not send it on to the EFC for the work groups?
I think that that's a different conversation. So are you asking when an issue arises just in general?
Yeah.
Okay,
I'm trying to
that
see
is
how
a-
this all fits together from beginning to end.
Yeah.
So this input model only gets triggered when there is a newly drafted policy or procedure that directly affects faculty from whoever,
So like the evaluation or tenure.
Yeah.
or a revised one. And so we are not saying that UFS now will come in and take over the evaluation.
I'm not saying take
or the
over. I'm just
tenure.
saying not send a proposal forward to EFC, just keep it yourself.
No, that's not. This is just a feedback model, just to get the feedback, say what it is, and deliver it to the responsible party.
Okay, so you'll still be forwarding proposals to EFC.
Proposals of what? I'm confused.
Oh, because that's what gets to EFC as a proposal. And if the proposal includes, like the tenure model, a change in procedure,
Mhm.
then since we have that PPAC model, or will have that PPAC model, would that have gone to EFC at all to begin with, or would that have stayed with UFS to go through
Well,
that
honestly,
process?
it was with UFS for like 12 years, right? Tenure was with UFS for 12 years until it got to EFC. So everything starts at UFS. EFC is only enacted when it is something that
Right,
is
right, and I
affects
want to
all
make sure it
faculty.
stays enacted because I think it has positive things to offer the district.
Well, I had a question. So the ad hoc committees that work within the EFC are coming up with our written documentation with the recommendations for whatever changes we think should be made based on whatever the charge is that we're investigating. We send that forward, or that ad hoc would then bring it to the EFC for discussion, editing, changes, and whatever alterations to the recommendations there are. But once it goes forward, and if it goes to the SLT, to the chancellor, to the board, if the recommendations are accepted and said, this is, yeah, we agree, this is what should be done, then isn't it someone else that drafts the actual edit to the policy, like someone in Linda's area? And then shouldn't that new draft of the policy that includes the recommendations then go through the PPAC or this model to make sure that there is input on that final policy, but not the actual recommendations themselves that started or triggered the initial change? Okay, that's my understanding of what it's supposed to be, which is why I think when we were talking about this over the last couple of weeks, I'm like, to me, it doesn't really belong in this venue. It belongs once that policy is drafted and under consideration for implementation by the board.
Thank you, Chris. Now I
Yeah,
understand.
you're right.
Yeah.
Okay, that's
You're
my
right.
understanding. Okay.
Yes, if it's helpful to think about the lab loading. So lab loading went all the way through numerous places of EFC, presentations to SLT, presentations to the board, re-presentations to SLT, more presentations to SLT, more presentations to the board. And then at some point, I imagine Linda's area, Cindy, who was everyone else involved got together and they edited the actual procedure that was about how faculty is paid for labs.
Right.
That's
To
where
reflect the
this process
decision.
would
Yeah.
be triggered.
We recommended that it go from 0.67 to 0.75 with the continuation up to 1. And we didn't look at the policy or procedure to make that happen. We said, this is what we want to happen.
Exactly.
Y'all do with your part
Exactly.
and make the changes.
Exactly. Yes.
And that would have been the stage that it would go to PPAC, go to our process, and then you would get feedback.
Yeah.
I
So
mean,
that would be
one-
after EFC.
Yeah.
That one is
Right.
so minor that I would not imagine anyone would say, no, EFC, we don't want you to make that change of that procedure. But that's a good example.
But we weren't thinking of it in terms of changing procedure, the written procedure. We were thinking of it what needs to be done, and then however it needs to happen was not EFC's responsibility. That's not our lane.
Yeah. I think you're right, Cindy. EFC is not really in the business of implementing. You're in the business of recommending, right?
Right.
And pushing it through to a decision with UFS. That's two parts of it. But then the back end where we're actually putting it in writing and publishing it, that's the policy process where you're giving another final review to all faculty. Is that fair, Michael Lee? And if they see something that they have questions about, or if we're off track, it still gives us,
And I would imagine some of the ones coming up, the ones that you're referencing, faculty evaluation and tenure, if EFC ends up making some, pretty landscape recommendations, then those procedure and policy changes are going to be more substantive, and they definitely faculty should have an opportunity to look at them.
Yeah. And you've been sharing that, I'm assuming you've been sharing all this work month after month through your senates. So faculty are aware with what EFC is working on, and they're probably giving you all kinds of input as you go about your ad hoc work. Yeah, but this is sort of a final, and then, but Michael Lee, I think one of the important points is there's stuff that would come through the EFC route, like we've just been talking about, but there are updates and edits and refreshes that come to policy and procedure on an ongoing basis from lots of different sources. I mean, I can't even keep up with what everybody's doing to Title IX now. Every time I turn around, there's another little small regulatory change that we have to put in, and those things would then, I think, probably when we're finished, those would route through. They might be the expedited process. We might have to say we need the expedited process because it's, a new law that somebody came up with. But yeah, I mean, there are lots of routes for updates to come from, but this makes sure that faculty sees all of that activity that's relevant to faculty. We don't want to bog you down with everything, but yeah. And the
thank you.
PPAC would be seeing everything, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's relevant, and you could raise your hand and say, no, we really think that is relevant to faculty.
Yeah, thank you. And actually, Cindy, I think this is helping me understand your question a little bit better. And I think I have a better answer, which is if something came through the PPAC that was so large and drastically changing something about faculty, and it was just going to go through the faculty input model, yes, there is definitely an opportunity that we could say, hit the brakes. This is huge. Does it need more effort and people behind it? And it might find itself in the EFC. Something like faculty mentorship, right? It didn't start at EFC, but someone somewhere said, this is actually maybe the EFC is probably equipped to do this, or the faculty development work. So I hope that is a better answer, because I got confused and lost, but I hope that, yes, there's still that opportunity. If something lands in the input model and it is clearly not just a review of a procedural issue, it is like a huge drastic change, then yes, absolutely, there's an opportunity to still pause and say, is this a proposal that needs to go to EFC?
Okay, thank you. Yes.
We don't need to change any EFC work process or charter or anything to account for this, right?
I don't think so.
At this point, until we'll need a bigger discussion on this. I'm sorry. I'm not ready to make a decision on, I want to see it in front of me and how it interacts with EFC.
Right.
Well, I think the important piece that's missing is the PPAC. Like, we don't actually, we can't say much about what the PPAC is going to do or how it's going to function because it doesn't exist right now. And our model has been made to be put inside the PPAC model. So we probably, as EFC, need to figure out, once PPAC is stood up and we understand its processes, we need to then consider, how does EFC go from presentation to SLT, presentation to the board, presentation to PPAC, maybe.
Yeah, we'll have to acknowledge PPAC somewhere in our process, even if it's not directly like that. If that's the PPAC process, we can refer to it and how we interact with it, and just make that formalized somewhere, and that would be appropriate without changing our process.
Well, and then, yeah, because I had a question about that. If the PPAC, because when Michael Lee was like clarifying her statement about, like if something's going through the PPAC and then it obviously is something a lot larger and more far reaching that might need additional research and stakeholder input, and it needs to go to the EFC, can the PPAC technically bring a charge or send a charge that they would like the EFC to take up, or would it have to go through the chancellor, through the board, through UFS, or through one of the existing channels? Would it be another stakeholder that could submit a charge request, or would it just go through the ones that currently exist in our charter?
I think there's so much overlap that I think almost all of SLT, if not all and more, we're going to be on PPAC. So I don't think it would be too much of an issue if something gets stalled at PPAC, that if it was, important enough that SLT could send it our way, or UFS is also going to be involved in PPAC, could take it on. So
So in other words, those individual bodies could say, like, so if one of the presidents of the Senate's on UFS that's part of the PPAC says, this is something we need to discuss, they could have that discussion at UFS, and then UFS could say, yes, let's go ahead and suggest that that be brought to the EFC or one of the other stakeholders from one of the other organizations in the PPAC. Okay, that makes sense.
I
We're gonna
apologize. my
test
coworker
all of
just
this
came and
on
sat in my
Chris.
lap. Okay, so we'll continue this discussion. This is a good start. Thank you, Michael Lee, for that presentation. You're frozen on my, now you're moving, okay. So we will keep this under consideration. I'll keep it on the agenda for discussion. I'm writing this down. And we'll see how it fits in with the EFC. Okay. It's 11:03. Are there any final thoughts from anybody? Okay, thank you. I hate to let us go early, but I'm sure we can find something to do with the time. Have a good day, y'all. Have a good weekend.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Oh, so.
Wait, let me stop
Cindy.
recording.
So Cindy, so what do